Good Wednesday evening, everyone. You are watching Direct Line, and our special guest is back by popular demand is the Chesapeake Fab Four, Governor Ehrlich, First Lady Kendel Ehrlich, Governor Allen, First Lady Susan Allen, and our special co-host is Delegate Rachel Munoz from Anne Arundel County, representing Serena Park in that area.
Yay!
And our regular host is Mark Unkefer. Take it away, guys.
Well, welcome back. This is always a great show, and we have a lot to talk about, and we can kind of go in lots of different directions, but certainly topic A, Delegate, wouldn't you agree, today is the debt limit. So what are your thoughts about that kind of the deal that we got? Could we have gotten a better deal, or is it what we need to do to keep the economy going?
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a big deal. And I just want to start off by thanking the four of you as a group for your service, because it's been invaluable to both of our states and our country. And we're so excited to hear your thoughts on these very current pressing issues tonight. So with that, we'll pass it over and let us know what you think, because you have way more experience dealing with congressional fights than we do. So we were so excited to hear your thoughts.
Go ahead, Bob. You're the home team.
Gov, I think, as usual, we're probably going to say the same thing.
We'll see.
The reality of this is difficult to contemplate, but the fact of it is we lost the election of 20. We lost, in many respects, the election of 22, although we did secure the House. But that means, as the bottom line, we only control the House. We don't control the Senate. We don't control the presidency. So Republicans typically lose on these continuing resolution / debt limit showdowns, especially when we only control 1/3 of the power center. That being said, I think Speaker McCarthy has done his best to step up, to force the president, who had most of the cards, quite frankly, to give in to some extent, to blink with respect to a series of initiatives, from reduced spending to getting school loans on time, etc. So I would give him an A- with regard to this effort. I know today we are reading of members of the Freedom Caucus who are not so happy with this. As a former whip in the House, I understand both sides, but it's very difficult to get away from the reality, which is when you have few cards to play and you're playing them, there's very little left to do. So I would give the speaker pretty high grades here. He probably cut the best we could. It's not the best deal in the world. But again, you do have some folks on the left upset as well. The definition of a decent deal is both sides are upset.
Well, we are in agreement. As usual, the way I look at it, Delegate Munoz and all the rest, is similar, obviously, to Governor Ehrlich, and that is, think of how this all started. President Biden said, we're not negotiating on it, just continue raising the debt limit. And I think Speaker McCarthy and those who negotiated on it have done an outstanding job. I'd say A- too. Yeah, it could be better. Of course it could be better. But I like the work requirements in particular that they've put into it. The far left doesn't like it either. The so-called progressives, what I consider regressive, but and some of the far right on our side don't like it, and that's politics and posturing and so forth. But I think I think Speaker McCarthy and the House Republicans are actually leading. The Democrats never thought they'd ever be able to come together and agree on anything with that very narrow majority, and so I think this is something that should pass. When this show's over is probably when they'll start voting on it tonight. And I think of Ronald Reagan. I'm Reagan Ranch Presidential Scholar, as you all know, for the Young America's Foundation. And Ronald Reagan would always say, if I could get 70% of a loaf, I'm going to take it. and they'll come back and get the other 30% later. And that other 30% later is going to be the appropriations bills this year. That's going to be the most important thing, where they take care of the paramount responsibility of the federal government, which is national defense, and then the rest, restrain spending. And those appropriations bills, I hope, will get done on time without continuing resolutions. And if they don't get it done on time, withhold their pay until they get it done. So get this passed tonight. I think it's a good step forward. It's not as much of a step as all of us would like, but it's a step forward. It's way better than we thought we would have had a month ago. And then go to work on these appropriations bills.
I believe there's a provision in there as well, Gov, that if all the appropriations bills do not pass on time, there will be a diminution in spending, an automatic retraction in non-discretionary spending. So now the chances of all those appropriations bills passing in a divided Congress, as we both know, are nil. But and it goes to broken process in Congress. It's been that way for decades, as we both know. But again, I think this was as good as we can do given the cards we've been dealt.
That's so true. But after tonight, as they vote, my hope is that we go out strong on messaging, because the infighting seems to take all the attention of the pundits. And yet we have accomplished something. And Kevin McCarthy has done a good job. And I think he's been strong. He's been forthright in what was in the bill. And he had a tough position, but I do think messaging going forward is going to be key, because people wanted to see cuts. I think what we're getting is basically not getting new funding. And so we've got to still talk about wasting government and how we can tackle that, because the general public just doesn't get it. Washington's economics doesn't make sense to the average Joe. So we've got to stay on good message, I think.
The one thing they do get is that Washington spends too much.
Right.
And we have to stick to our budgets, but they never stick to theirs. So hopefully that message will get through. And I think as we go forward and the kitchen table issues are out there, hopefully they'll recognize that the Republicans are leading in this regard.
I think, Kendel, most polling showed that people felt that Washington was spending too much. And that gave, I think, Speaker McCarthy some leverage in these negotiations. And a lot of some of that polling, to the extent you can count on polling being accurate, put some pressure on Biden to do something as president that, look, you're going to be responsible for this as well.
I want to go back to a point earlier made, which we typically lose in the court of public opinion when it comes to the politics of CRs and the debt limit, raising the debt limit. It's simply because there's so many spending constituencies in the country. Democrats turn the faucets on, and that spending pressure latches up. Obviously, they have a compliant press. So those two factors make it very difficult for us to win in the mainstream media.
Yeah. So here's my question. That was such a hopeful message, and it makes me feel much better. I think I'll sleep better at night knowing that you guys think that this was a great deal, a good deal, a fair deal, like the best we could do. And so you both all four of you sort of brought up the division that we have within our party. And this is sort of like the tale as old as time, right? But do you guys have any messages, any advice for our party and how we can kind of like clean up our ranks, close ranks, like have each other's back, work together a little bit more productively? Do you see that on the horizon? Do you see a path towards that at all?
Yeah, I do. It's a civil war in our culture right now, and whoever we put up is going to win. Period.
Well, that will unite the party. I think that once we get through our intra-squad scrimmage, and again, as Governor Ehrlich said, the media loves to focus, and Susan said it too, focus on the few Republicans who are upset with it and their derogatory remarks about everything. But I do think that once we get through this intra-squad scrimmage, and it's going to be a heck of a fight for the nomination, hopefully by the time we get to the congressional, senatorial, and the presidential election next year, once we have our nominee, we'll get united. And people have all sorts of views that they may have. But one of the things I always found difficult, but you can do it as a leader, and Bob did it obviously as governor of Maryland, is you got to get all the wings of the Republican Party flapping together in the same direction. And that takes leadership. And that'll be something that's very important in looking forward to our nominee who can unite our party, which generally is not enough to win. It's certainly not enough to win in Maryland. It's not enough to win in Virginia. You got to get 55, 60% of the independent voters. And so have a message that doesn't just resonate with Republicans, because we need to add and multiply and make sure that we're talking about ideas and issues and solutions and reforms that'll help, as Kendel says, the kitchen table issues of who's going to make sure we have more affordable fuel and electricity and food and job opportunities, safe communities, parents in control of their children's education in our schools and so forth. Those are the issues that matter to most normal people who care about, cost of living, how much they get to keep of what they earn, and also the safety in their communities and the quality of the education in their schools. But Delegate Munoz, you'll be the one most important as far as education is concerned, because that's a state and local prerogative more than having the federales telling us what to do.
Safety as well. I mean, that's a huge
safety.
state responsibility. So
Yeah.
that will continue to be a big issue, I think, is safety. And it's a women's issue in that so often women are worried about their elderly parents. Can they go out safely in the evening? Can their children make it safely to school? So those are issues that we're going to have to continue to reach out to suburban women with and talk about our plan in providing safety at the state level, but also what can be done on the federal level.
I agree, but you're talking to two football families here. And when we talk about inter-squad scrimmages, you know why coaches hate them? Because they are injuries in inter-squad scrimmages.
Yes.
And in primaries, it can be injuries. And the last thing you want to do is an injured candidate taking his or her balls and going home. So it is going to be a very delicate time over the next 2 months. We have a plethora of issues to run on. Basically dysfunction at the federal level for the last 4 years, or 3 years now, but 4 years next year. We get that. But there's going to be a lot of egos involved, hurt feelings involved, money involved, and it's never a fun time when, especially folks who generally agree on issues coming from the same philosophical direction, compete against each other, especially when one is named Trump.
Yeah, let's just talk about the elephant in the room. I mean, it is tough. I mean, we all appreciated what President Trump did policy-wise, but the fact that he continues to shoot arrows at his own teammates, even last night, and I just don't understand that. His advisors have got to tell him that he's harming not just himself, but the entire party when he's continuing to criticize those who have the same intentions he does of moving our philosophy forward.
That's very nice, dear. But to use a football analogy, is President Trump has not showed himself to be a very coachable player. And I don't think he listens to folks. He calls his own plays. He'll even change the play after the ball's been snapped. And everyone else is scurrying to block or to figure out how to make the play work. And so he had great plays, great winning plays. National security, national defense, energy policy was fantastic. Judges, so many things. But sometimes the messenger gets in the way of the message. And so we'll see. But the thing is, and look at this in the 2022 elections, is the people of America, and including in battleground states, thought our country was going in the wrong direction. I always look at that as the most important poll of all, is do you think our country's on the right track or wrong track? And right now, most people, just like they did last year, think our country's going in the wrong direction. But you'd need to come up with positive, constructive ideas that motivate and inspire people. And I think there is a yearning to be for something rather than just identifying what's wrong and how bad the other guy is.
I agree. I also think that we need to recognize that women usually decide these elections. And And so we've got a lot of really good issues for women, and we really need to be out in the forefront talking about them. As far as women goes, Republican women, we're the new, we are the new defenders of being a woman. We are, we believe that our girls should have their own sports and compete against each other, and that's a common sense issue. So we are the new feminists. That's the word I was looking for.
Well,
really
that's
need-
quite an announcement. I didn't know I was married to a feminist. Right.
we need to own it. We do. We need to own those. And Governor, as you mentioned, the common sense issues of the kitchen table, energy, the price of eggs, what it's like in our family. And for me, safety and the craziness of the criminal justice system and how it's been turned on its head, how our Constitution has been turned on its head, that we have FBI agents showing up at people's homes. This is not the America that our founders so brilliantly put together. And I think it's really important that we recognize that and educate people that if they can do it to someone else, they're going to do it to you. So let's get together and really unite. This country is great, and the systems that were founded are great. So enough with the experimenting.
So both first ladies here have targeted the real issue every election cycle: suburban women. And we better have the right message. We lost suburban women these last 2 election cycles. I think we know generally the reasons why. And we have to be as competitive in the suburbs with women in order to win. It's not complicated.
And Governor, I think you're correct that we shouldn't be negative, but now we need a comparison. We have a comparison of the former administration, the Trump administration, and we have a comparison to this administration. And there's a lot to compare from Afghanistan on down. So I think hopefully people will really be listening and thinking how their homes and their families have been impacted by that change.
Well, we talked about before, I think you guys used the football analogy. I was going to use the biblical 11th commandment.
No, that was Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, well, I think with the Ronald Reagan 11th commandment, but I think we ended up in the same place. What I found interesting, and I wanted to kind of follow up with kind of what we were just talking about, but the observation is what's interesting is with DeSantis's announcement particularly, and obviously there are other candidates as well as the former president running, but the coverage to date seems to have been dominated, and with very high profile coverage of the back and forth of Trump says something, DeSantis replies, and the ping ponging. And I was kind of interested in the point you made before about the consequence of what that can do over a period of time. Can you elaborate both all on the risk that you see for the party if that seems to be the coverage that gets dominated from now and the caucuses in Iowa aren't for at least 6 months now, right?
Yeah, it'll be a lot of bump and run, and the media likes the back and forth. I will say this for all of y'all with direct line, you operate better than Elon Musk and Twitter did for the rollout of DeSantis. We had some problems here, but we figured them out 2 minutes before we came on as I disconnected my Bose earbuds and Bluetooth. But yeah, that's going to happen. There'll be comparisons. And I think that ultimately President Biden's he's going to try to run this campaign like he did the last, which is hardly campaigning at all. And I think that the fact that Robert Kennedy is getting about 20% of the vote and he doesn't want to debate this, that, and the other, and they're going to see our candidates, whether it's Governor DeSantis, President Trump, Mike Pence when he gets in, and when Governor Christie gets in, he's going to be the kamikaze pilot and everything. And then everyone likes Tim Scott, Governor Nikki Haley. We have some good quality folks who have a lot of good things to say, and And so that, so long as they, the back and forth and bump and run, that's just going to be a part of it. And I think that the one thing that we haven't said that's going to be a big issue and a new part of this entire political ballgame is going to be the Dobbs decision and this issue of abortion. We have elections in Virginia this year for our state legislature, our House of Delegates, and the state Senate. And my view of this whole thing, of that issue, is that we should embrace the Dobbs decision. Conservatives have forever said this is an issue that should be decided by the people in the states, not unelected judges appointed for life. And this will be played out in the state legislatures and the people in the states rather than the federal government. Now, some people think the federal government ought to be involved in it. And I have my views. I'm for reasonable moderation on the excesses of abortion. No one carries around a sign that says that. They're either pro-life or pro-choice. But I think there are a lot of people who would like to see some reasonable moderation on the excesses of abortion. When an unborn child is viable, could live outside the womb, I think there's an interest in a government protecting that innocent unborn life. I think most people think parents ought to be at least notified if an unwed minor daughter is going through the trauma of an abortion. I think most taxpayers don't think we should pay for elective abortions. Most think there should be exceptions for rape, incest, gross fetal abnormalities, or where the physical life of the mother is endangered. And that's not banning abortion from conception, but it's not what the Democrats want, which is, generally speaking, abortion for all 9 months, for any reason or no reason at all, have the taxpayers pay for it. The baby could live outside the womb. They still think there ought to be abortion. So each candidate who's running has to determine in his and her own mind what they think is the right parameters that government should set at the state level on abortion, and take that stand. Whatever stand you take, you're going to get a broken rib. There's no way you're going to please everyone. But keep with that. If you, in your own heart and mind, think that's appropriate, stick with it. You're not going to please everyone, but if you spin around and tell different groups different things, no one will trust you, and you'll have a bunch of broken ribs, and you'll lose. And so this is going to be an issue that every candidate is going to have to determine in his and her own mind, and how they then, with convincing mannerisms and expressions, let people know, here's where I stand on this issue. But be respectful to people who have different opinions.
Gov, that contrast you just articulated should be made by every candidate and should not be a political loser if properly articulated. Yeah. And Mark, going back to your general question, do you want to attract attention in Washington, D.C. as a Republican? Well, then take on Republicans, indict Republicans, criticize your own party. That's your lane, right? And so the press loves this. They love intramural fights with the Republican side. There's nothing we can do about that in the short term. It's just live with it. But that is a fact of life in Washington, D.C. If you want to get on the Sunday shows, take on your own party as an arm.
So moving on, we've talked about the election. We've talked about, why don't we talk a little about handicaps of Democrats? We talked about that race. What are the prospects that President Biden could end up deciding not to run, or get embarrassed in the primary, and the Democratic Party decides to go in a different direction?
If I can just, I know Kendel wants to add to this, but on our podcast tomorrow, which we're going to take tomorrow, we're going to talk about the Kennedy challenge here, because suddenly there's a liberal not on a milk carton. There's actually a liberal out there talking liberal stuff, being a liberal, as opposed to, Gov, your aggressive, progressive, dominant wing of the Democratic Party these days. This is a traditional liberal, articulate, more free speech. It reminds me of John F. Kennedy. So I think he's a refreshing presence on the left these days. And as Republicans, we should welcome him into the national debate.
I mean, his book on Dr. Fauci was difficult to read. It really, to get through the whole thing and to realize what was happening, and his documentation of it was so alarming.
So
And he's a very interesting candidate on that side.
he is, and I think conservatives have really been drawn to the fact that he did point out all of the misinformation given during the vaccines and what it was doing around the world, not just in our country, but why we weren't paying attention and why our government wasn't providing more information and all of that. So we all cheer that. But I think when you dig deeper, there are certainly other issues on energy and other policies that, but maybe, as you say, Governor Ehrlich, that he is a true liberal and stands where he is. I also thought it was very good of him to say that he was not willing to take on the mantle of John F. Kennedy. He said he and his other family members, have always chosen to just be their own person and to not take on any other Kennedy mantle, which I thought was very admirable for him to say that.
It's just so refreshing to see a liberal taking on the anti-speech left these days. It's refreshing.
Yeah.
But I don't think he'll get their nomination. I think the Democrats, if the Democrats, they nominated the best candidate last time in 2020 in Biden, out of who was running, because he wasn't threatening. They thought he was a leftist senator, which he generally was, and would work, with Republicans every now and then and so forth. But he's governed as if Bernie Sanders won. And that's the way he's governing. And he also doesn't seem particularly with it. The Democrats, who I think have shown themselves well, is Governor Polis of Colorado. I think he showed some good proportionality and balance in the managing through the pandemic. I think he's about the only one. I like Joe. I know Joe Manchin and like him. And all the reasons why I like Joe Manchin is why the Democrats, with their religious views, and by that religious views, it's the climate alarmism cult. The fact that he actually thinks coal and natural gas are beneficial to our country, which they are. But for them, for that party, that he's a heretic because he actually thinks we ought to use our plentiful American energy resources to power our country and have more affordable fuel and food and electricity and not be beholden to others, as well as exporting liquefied natural gas to our friends in Europe or Asia or Ukraine, for that matter.
I'd love to elaborate on that. I think it was an interesting point, Governor Allen. It does seem that sometimes the issue, one of the big issues that are going to have a long-term impact on folks we don't talk about. We talk about the horse race issues and those sort of decarbonization economic questions of what it's going to do. It's off in the future. We're not going to be able to have a gas-powered car. We're going to not have gas-powered trucks. We're going to have a lot more expensive energy. We're going to do just so many changes that are being proposed. And yet it's sort of been framed that if you question that, it's well, you must be a climate change denier. There's really not that middle ground. And I wonder if you kind of elaborate on what the prospects of being able to articulate that vision are.
Well, when people pay their monthly power bill or every time they fill up with gas, they'll see it. And it obviously fuel costs and the cost of natural gas, for example, which is a feedstock for chemicals, fertilizers, plastics, metals, tires, glass, everything else. It affects, it's energy is the lifeblood of our economy. And we're blessed with the most energy resources of any country in the world. The other side thinks we're going to run our economy on these intermittent, unreliable, costly sources of electricity and energy, which depend on the weather, which is solar, which will operate at best maybe 25% of the time. And then wind power, which is really expensive, operates maybe 40% of the time if you're lucky. And the most stupid of all is offshore wind, which is what's happening here in Virginia. For Cape May, New Jersey shows the way. They've actually passed a resolution against offshore wind turbines off Cape May, New Jersey. but we're going to have 176 wind turbines. It's going to cost $10 billion. It'll operate about a third of the time. And it's
killing the whales.
Well, it may. I guarantee you, if that were a natural gas platform out there, they'd be stopping it right off the bat. I mean, they just this bothering their aquatic life, this, that, and the other. But the reality is, if you want energy that is reliable and affordable to the people, offshore wind is neither reliable nor is it affordable. And then the monopolies that generate it, which are the utilities, they get their 10% return on investment. If you told them to burn dried orange peels, they'd do it. It'd be great for citrus farmers, but the point is that they're stuck. And so this is why I call them regressives. The people hurt worst by these policies are not the wealthy elite who fly to some UN climate conference in Paris or Cancun. It is hardworking, lower and middle income families who have to pay higher prices for their gasoline, for their food, for their electricity, and that's why it's regressive. They're the ones hurt the most by these policies. And if people can get educated and informed about it, they'll say, heck no, we don't want that. We want something that's reliable. Natural gas provides it. Coal does, but they're against coal. And the other one that is a constant base load, it costs more, is nuclear. And I think that in the future, you're going to see some more of these small modular nuclear reactors, which are used right now right around where we live here in Hampton Roads. They're in our aircraft carriers and in our submarines. And one of those, say if you hooked up the USS Ronald Reagan, it could power 40,000 homes. That's the size of the city of Portsmouth. And so if you put 10 of those small modular reactors together, that can power right many people, and it's reliable base load, and it's emissions free.
Mark, you talked about there's no middle ground. I think most people, average people, live in the middle ground. They're for all the above, as we've articulated here. The problem is these kids go to college and get all the green stuff indoctrinated into their brain. They buy it. And they just have to remember one central proposition. Because some leftist says it doesn't mean science reflects it. And you always hear from the left, science. Well, the Gov just talked about the real science, and they don't want to hear it. So I do think this is an issue we get our brains beat out. We shouldn't. I think the average person is generally where we are. We all want clean, efficient energy, but if you want to kill an economy, if you want to eliminate blue-collar jobs, if you want to declare war on the working class, blue-collar America, make energy more expensive.
True.
And the Russians like it as well.
Yeah. That's the Germans.
Yeah, exactly.
So that was actually going to be sort of in the direction of my next question, because we've talked about sort of the scrimmage of primaries and the issues within the party, as well as some domestic stuff. But what do you guys think about how we're currently handling the international playing field, and what do you expect to see from our Republican candidates coming forward, and what do you think their messaging is going to be, and what do you think a winning message is going to be for our country dealing with Ukraine, Russia, China, all these issues that we're seeing on the news? But again, almost like in COVID and with Fauci, like how much of the real story are we getting through mainstream media?
Senator?
All right, I'll go with that. First of all, China cheats. They're an adversary. We need to understand that. They have long-term plans, and they stick to it. And China is much more dangerous now than ever. Their economy is stronger. Their military is stronger. And even before the previous presidents would have a term limit of 2 terms. Now she's president for life. And so they're no doubt a danger. But we're so intertwined with them that they have owning our debt as well as our supply chains. We need to get more of our supply chains from reliable sources around the world. COVID was a prime example. We're taking active pharmaceutical ingredients, ingesting them from China. You wouldn't feed your dog food from China, and we're ingesting medicines from them. And they don't have the same standards of quality as we do. And so we need to onshore pharmaceutical manufacturing, or at least get it from reliable sources. Taiwan, we need to support Taiwan, get them the armaments to defend themselves. I think it'd be interesting to see how candidates take this Ukraine issue. I'm one who's for Ukraine. And I think we should give them the arms they need. And actually, Russia has united NATO more than anyone else ever has. The fact that Finland and Sweden have now joined NATO and want to join NATO, they see the threat. And so I think we need to support Ukraine in this. I know there's some Republicans who have this isolationist point of view, which I think is dangerous and oblivious. Just as our energy policy is whimsical, I think it's whimsical to think that appeasement towards Russia is going to do anything to thwart Russia. Russia's Governor Ehrlich brought up Afghanistan. I thought Russia saw how that debacle of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and they said, "Oh, we can get away with this with these guys." And so we need to support, in my view, Ukraine, who wants to protect their sovereignty and their freedoms. And I don't think we should go wobbly in that regard either.
I would just add two issues there. An inappropriately downside Navy is provocative to the world's miscreants. And the woke at the Pentagon, woke at the service academies, another subject that we've discussed a bunch on our podcast. The bottom line to the Pentagon should be readiness, not woke.
Oh, yeah. And then they knock out people in the military who wouldn't get a COVID shot. That was just such stupid policy. Yeah. Then you ask the Joint Chiefs of Staff what's the greatest threat to our country, and they say it's the weather. It's the climate, not China, not terrorists, not Russia. I mean, this is leadership.
But you know what, Buff? And Kendel and I, again, elections have repercussions. Elections have consequences. All the we're discussing here, from the woke to Afghanistan, is a function of Joe Biden winning that election. So going back to the central theme here, the predicate to this conversation, we better win.
Well, even going back further to Obama's the first one who went to the Naval Academy or West Point, I don't know which one it was, and said that climate change was our biggest threat. I have nephews at both academies, and we've watched through them what has gone on, and readiness is key. The fact that we live in an area where all the SEAL teams are, they train here at Oceana, and a lot of them are based out of here in Virginia Beach. And they now, as you all have seen this week in the news, are trying to pull in new SEAL trainees. They're reviewing how they were training before, but many dropped out because of the mandated COVID shots. I mean, that was harmful to their bodies. They were not going to go along with that. But as China continues to build militarily and build their Navy, why we sit back and allow ours to dwindle is really, really frightening.
The military is one area that needs to be meritorious. It has to be a merit. They can't lower standards for the SEALs. And we live a couple miles from the Naval Academy and have midshipmen who graduated this year. And it's been very interesting to see the training that they've had to go through that has nothing to do with military training. And it just makes you nervous when you recognize how strong China is.
And also the fact that there's a reason military recruitment goals have not been matched.
Right.
Be all you can be used to be. We've gone away. I guess they're going back to that now because they failed to meet their goals. But there's a reason they failed to meet their goals, called Afghanistan and woke.
Right.
Right. Absolutely. I was having this conversation with a friend yesterday, and I said, she's like, where's this all going to end? We're talking about the wokeness and the boycotts and all the stores we can't bring our small children into right now. And she's like, where's this going to end? And I was saying, our culture is just, I come from multi-generations of military, like seen combat, World War II. My mom was like a award-winning markswoman, I guess, back in the day. They called them marksmen because it doesn't matter who's behind it, right?
I've never heard the term marks person.
No, she was a marksman. It doesn't
Right,
matter who's on the
exactly.
other side. She was great at it. And I said, we're just soft as a culture. And you know what she's like, how is this going to end? When is this going to end? And I said, maybe hypothetically, not to be, too excitable, but like World War III, I said, wokeness won't survive World War III because the soft, the long hair, the ears piercing, the gender confusion, like you put people into combat and all of that will dissolve away because it won't survive.
No, but an election can change that. If it's
That would be
presidency and if it's from the top to the bottom and it's not putting up with all of these lowering of standards and all the things that we talked about today, I think that Bob promises me that it can change. So I'm believing him.
Me too. I'm going to
And
believe
remain
too. That
hopeful.
I like that
30
better.
years. I would also add that my last line of my speeches these days is that the culture war was brought to us. We didn't start it, but we better win it.
Good one. We may steal that.
No,
It's
that's
true.
a good one.
Do it.
Well,
So that has been it's interesting. We talked a little bit about the tension between talking about sort of kitchen table issues, economic issues, and the culture wars. Do we as Republicans run into a challenge when we're talking about the culture war issues and not the kitchen table issues? Is there a way of blending the two, or how do you get that balance right?
here's what I say is trust the parents. So many of these culture war issues are fought out in the schools with what's being taught in the schools, what books they're reading, what programs, films, whatever. And so on these issues, say that you're on the side of the parents because no one cares more about their children than parents, certainly, and government is not God. So I think that the way to handle it is, the parents ought to be informed. Parents ought to be making some of these decisions for what they think is appropriate for their children, or if their children are, this transgender surgery and so forth. Gosh, to get your ears pierced, to take an aspirin, a minor needs parental consent. So why shouldn't a parent be involved in those type of issues? And I think that the main one of them all, and Kendel brought it up, is girls' sports or women's sports ought to be for women. That's just a matter of fairness. And I don't, if somebody's gay, if someone's transgender, we believe in freedom and liberty as long as they're not harming someone else, leave them alone. But don't be pushing that on people who have different views of it.
Wait,
And
Susan, we fought forever for Title IX.
Right, exactly. And that's why I don't understand why more women aren't speaking up. I think they've come along. I think Riley Gaines has certainly had great press, and she's been fantastic.
Yeah.
But I don't know where those other quiet women are who fought so loud and so long for Title IX. But I think if we just continue to fight in our communities and talk to other women and say, just network about this issue and talk about this issue for our daughter's sake, it will unite a lot of women, I think.
Yeah, I think we have to define our terms. Your point is really well taken. When the left sees the term culture war, they think abortion, and they want to engage on that.
Right.
Women generally.
Right.
Many of these issues we're talking about are not hard issues. They're pretty easy. Gov, when you talk about preemption of parental rights, if we can't win that one, we had to quit. If we can't win we fought 50 years for Title IX. We all enjoy women's sports, all these opportunities to go to college. It's been a wild success. And now what are you doing to it? And you think that's fair to girls? If we can't win that one, we had to quit. So we have to define our terms.
Right.
That's a great idea. We're unfortunately coming up to our final minute, so I wanted to give you all an opportunity to talk about what you're up to, kind of promote what you're doing. I know Governor Ehrlich, Kendel, you've talked about your podcast. We'll hear more about that, and then kind of turn the tables as well.
All right. You want to go?
Sure. Bottom line, with Bob and Kendel Ehrlich, it's been expanding. We have a lot more listeners, and we just keep working at that. And we love being able to put out our thoughts and to get some good feedback from folks about what they're thinking about the issues that we've talked about today.
We've had some great guests, Mike Pompeo and Newt Gingrich, and I guess we'll get the Allens on at some point, if we meet their demand for the price.
I want to also just thank the delegate. Maryland is not an easy place to battle, and I always admire when young people like you put your name in and do that fight for all of us in a difficult state. So we really appreciate the work you do. You're just north of Annapolis in your district, and we just want you to know that we appreciate it. And if we can help in any way, let us know.
Thank you. That really means a lot. Thank you.
And the Allens, where can we get more of you?
I'll yield my time to Susan.
I want to congratulate Delegate Munoz for working, because that is a tough position to be in. You all are tackling tough issues, and I know that you are leading with a great compass. And so just keep up your good work. And it's nice to have a smart, intelligent delegate in Maryland. We can all call now a friend, and we just appreciate that. But I think the three of us women on this show tonight will agree that it's probably incumbent upon us to really network in our circles of friends wherever we are, and that it's going to be really, really crucial in Virginia this year with our entire legislature up, but certainly next year in the presidential. And in the meantime, if we can tamp down some of the rhetoric coming from some of our candidates as best we can, maybe just try to pivot and get on better subjects. I love Kellyanne Conway, and she's so good at messaging. I wish she could talk to her former boss a little better, but if we read her book, I highly recommend her book, and y'all get her on your podcast. She's so good at being able to define the messages for us to talk about. So our work's cut out for us.
Well, one of the things I work with with the Young America's Foundation are young people. And so Delegate Munoz, you give us hope for the future. You're articulate, you're smart, and you can deliver a message that is better than Bob and myself. Susan and Kendel are better than we are. But we wish you the best. The main thing I would say to you is obviously stick to your principles. There's no question you'll do that. But make sure you do everything ethically. There's nothing more important than integrity. And I think all of us see in you a great future. So we wish you the very best. And you have fans now down past the Eastern Shore in Virginia. Say, hey, there's a really good, sparkling delegate in Maryland.
And never be afraid to use a football analogy.
My oldest son is only 10, but I'm going to get there, you guys.
Green Hornets are pretty good.
Green Hornets are pretty good. All right.
Well, thank you all for a great show, and we really appreciate it.
Good being with you all.
Dwight.
Thank you.
Guys.
Nice to see you.
Have a
Great to see you all.
Adios.